The disappearing customers. Working the graveyard shift at the gas station had always been uneventful, until recently. Over several nights, I started to notice something peculiar. Customers who came to refuel their cars never seemed to leave. Their vehicles remained parked at the pumps, abandoned, with no sign of the drivers. At first, I thought it was a bizarre coincidence, maybe a series of pranks. But as the nights went on, the empty cars multiplied, and the eerie silence of the station began to weigh heavily on me. One particularly quiet night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the cold, misty air, moving from car to car, looking for any clues. The vehicles were all empty, keys still in the ignition, doors slightly ajar as if the drivers had just stepped out for a moment. I returned to the station's small office, flipping through the security footage. The grainy black and white video showed customers arriving, filling up their tanks, and then nothing. They just vanished into thin air. My skin prickled with unease as I rewound the tape again and again, hoping to catch something I had missed. But it was the same every time: arrival, refuel, and then nothing. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, I delved into the station's history. I spent my days off at the local library, poring over old newspapers and town records. That's when I stumbled upon an old legend. The gas station was built on a ley line, a place of immense supernatural energy. According to local folklore, ley lines were believed to be pathways of spiritual power, and sometimes they could act as portals to other dimensions. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. The gas station wasn't just a refueling stop. It was a trap. The ley line beneath it was consuming unsuspecting souls, drawing them into another realm. I had to find a way to close the portal and save the remaining victims before it was too late. That night, armed with a makeshift map of the ley lines and a growing sense of dread, I returned to the station. I'd gathered everything I could find about closing supernatural portals: candles, salt, and a prayer from an old grimoire I found in the library's restricted section. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew heavy, and the air around the station seemed to hum with energy. I began the ritual, lighting the candles and sprinkling salt around the perimeter of the pumps. As I chanted the incantation, the ground beneath me trembled, and a low, guttural growl emanated from the depths of the earth. The portal's presence became tangible, a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to devour the light from my candles. Shadows stretched and contorted, reaching out with tendrils of inky blackness. My heart pounded in my chest, but I pressed on, my voice growing louder and more determined with each word of the incantation. Suddenly, the ground split open, and a blinding light shot up from the earth, illuminating the night sky. The force of the energy knocked me off my feet, and I struggled to keep my focus. The shadowy tendrils recoiled, writhing and shrieking, as the light grew brighter and more intense. With a final, desperate shout, I completed the ritual. The light flared brilliantly, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The ground sealed itself, and the night was once again silent and still. I lay there for a moment, catching my breath, before slowly rising to my feet. The abandoned cars remained, but there was a sense of peace in the air, as if the station had been cleansed. I hoped that the souls trapped by the ley line had been released, free to find their way back to where they belonged. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, I knew I had to report the abandoned vehicles and the missing customers to the authorities. But deep down, I understood that some mysteries were never meant to be fully explained. The gas station had been a portal to another realm, and I had managed to close it. But I would always wonder about the fate of those who had vanished, and whether the ley lines would ever awaken again. In the days that followed, the authorities arrived to tow away the abandoned cars and file missing person reports. I didn't tell them the whole truth. I couldn't. They wouldn't believe me anyway. As far as they knew, the customers had simply disappeared without a trace. I did my best to resume a normal routine, but the weight of what had happened lingered heavily on my mind. One evening, a few weeks later, a new customer walked into the gas station. She was a middle-aged woman with a kind face and a calm demeanor. She introduced herself as Claire, a paranormal investigator. Word had spread about the mysterious disappearances, and she had come to find out more. I was hesitant to share my story, but something about her felt trustworthy. Maybe she could provide the closure I so desperately needed. I recounted everything that had happened, from the strange disappearances to the ritual that closed the portal. Claire listened intently, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, she told me about her own experiences with ley lines and supernatural phenomena. She believed that the ley line beneath the gas station was not entirely dormant, and that the ritual had only temporarily sealed it. "We need to perform a more permanent ritual," she explained. "One that will bind the ley line and prevent it from reactivating, but I'll need your help." Together, we began to prepare for the final ritual. Claire brought specialized equipment, crystals, ancient texts, and rare herbs. We marked the boundaries of the ley line with sigils designed to contain its energy. As midnight approached, we stood side by side, ready to confront the supernatural forces once more. The night was eerily quiet as we began the ritual. Claire chanted in a language I didn't understand, her voice steady and commanding. The air grew thick with tension, and the ground beneath us trembled. Suddenly, the swirling vortex of darkness reappeared, more intense than before. Shadowy figures emerged, their forms grotesque and menacing. "Hold your ground," Claire shouted over the roar of the ley line. I focused on my part of the ritual, sprinkling the rare herbs into the vortex and placing crystals at key points around the gas station. The shadowy figures hissed and lunged at us, but the sigils held them at bay. As the ritual reached its peak, the vortex began to shrink, the shadows retreating into the darkness. Claire raised her arms, a final incantation spilling from her lips. The crystals glowed brightly, and a wave of energy surged through the ground. The vortex shuddered violently, then collapsed in on itself with a deafening roar. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the ground sealed once more, and the night returned to its peaceful silence. Claire and I stood there, breathless and exhausted, but victorious. "It's done," she said, her voice filled with relief. "The ley line is bound. The gas station is safe." I thanked Claire for her help, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She smiled and handed me a small crystal, a token of protection. "Keep this with you," she said. "It will help ward off any lingering energies." As she left, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The gas station was no longer a place of fear and darkness. It was just a gas station again, a place where people could come and go without worrying. In the weeks that followed, business slowly returned to normal. The authorities closed their investigations, and the memory of the disappearances began to fade, but I never forgot what had happened. The crystal Claire had given me remained with me, a constant reminder of the nights I faced the supernatural and won. Every now and then, I would feel a slight tremor beneath my feet or catch a whisper in the wind. But I knew that the ley line was bound, and the gas station was safe. I had confronted the darkness and emerged victorious, and I would be ready if it ever returned. The night shift. The first night on the job was always supposed to be the hardest. That's what I kept telling myself as I pulled into the gas station parking lot under a sky as black as pitch. Located along a desolate stretch of highway, the station was a lonely beacon in the vast emptiness. The manager, an older man named Bill, had given me the rundown earlier that day. Everything seemed straightforward enough. But as the night progressed, I quickly realized that nothing about this place was normal. I settled behind the counter, the fluorescent lights casting an unnatural glow over the rows of snacks and drinks. The radio played softly in the background, a welcome distraction from the oppressive silence. Around midnight, the first strange occurrence happened. The radio cut out, replaced by a burst of static that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I fiddled with the dial, but no matter what frequency I turned to, the static persisted. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, and I turned quickly, heart pounding. There was nothing there, just the empty aisles. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. Around 2 a.m., a customer pulled up. The figure that stepped out of the car was tall and thin, wrapped in a long coat that seemed too heavy for the mild night. He walked slowly, almost as if he were gliding, and his face was obscured by the shadows of the hood. He approached the counter and asked for a pack of cigarettes in a voice that seemed to echo unnaturally in the small space. I handed him the cigarettes, and he slid a crumpled bill across the counter. As I turned to make change, I heard the door chime. When I looked up, the man was gone. I glanced outside, but his car was still there, sitting idle by the pump. I stepped out from behind the counter, a sense of unease creeping over me. The car was empty. A cold wind blew through the station, chilling me to the bone. I hurried back inside and locked the door, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. The power went out at 3 a.m., plunging the station into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using the weak flashlight to navigate my way to the back room where the breaker box was located. As I pushed open the door, the beam of my flashlight fell on something that made my blood run cold. There, scrawled on the walls, in what looked like dried blood, were symbols and words I couldn't understand. In the center of the room, an old newspaper lay on the floor. The headline screamed out at me: "Grisly murder at remote gas station. Victims unidentified." I picked up the newspaper with trembling hands. The article detailed a horrific murder that had taken place at this very station decades ago. The victims had never been identified, and their killer had vanished without a trace. The station had been built over the site of the murders, and local legends said the spirits of the victims haunted the place, seeking revenge. A sudden noise behind me made me jump. I turned, and my flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows. Standing in the doorway were the ghostly figures of the victims, their faces twisted in expressions of pain and anger. They moved towards me, their forms flickering like a distorted film reel. Panicking, I backed away, only to feel a cold hand grip my shoulder. I spun around to see the man in the long coat, his hood now pushed back to reveal hollow eyes and a gaunt face. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his breath cold against my skin. I broke free and ran, the spirits close behind me. Bursting out of the back room, I raced to the front door, flinging it open and sprinting into the night. The dark highway stretched out before me, but I kept running, the sense of unseen eyes watching me never fading. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I finally stopped, gasping for breath. Looking back, the gas station was a distant silhouette. I knew I could never return. The spirits of that place had claimed to many souls already. My only hope was that, by escaping, I had somehow appeased them, giving them the peace they so desperately sought. But deep down, I feared they would always be there, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander into their domain. I didn't return to my apartment that morning. I drove straight to the library in town, hoping to find more information about the gas station's dark history. Exhaustion tugged at my eyelids, but fear kept me awake. I had to know more about what I had experienced. Inside the library, the scent of old books and the quiet murmur of pages turning was a stark contrast to the terror of the night. I approached the librarian, a kind-looking woman with silver hair, and asked if there were any local history archives. She led me to a dusty corner of the library, where rows of newspapers and old records awaited. Hours passed as I sifted through the yellowed pages, finding snippets of information about the murders. The victims had been a group of travelers, their bodies discovered by a passing truck driver. The details were gruesome, but what struck me most were the reports of strange symbols found at the scene, the same symbols I had seen in the back room. Then I found a name that made my blood run cold: Richard Holcomb. He was the owner of the gas station at the time of the murders, and his sudden disappearance after the incident had made him the prime suspect. Yet, his body was never found, and the case went cold. As I read on, the pieces began to fit together. The man in the long coat, the one who had vanished at the pump, matched the descriptions of Holcomb. It seemed his spirit, twisted by guilt or perhaps by the evil that had occurred there, was bound to the station, along with the victims. I knew I had to go back. I had to find a way to put the spirits to rest. Returning to the gas station was the last thing I wanted, but I couldn't leave those souls trapped in eternal torment. Armed with a plan, I bought sage, candles, and holy water, and waited for nightfall. As darkness descended, I approached the gas station once more. The abandoned cars still stood silent and eerie, casting long shadows under the flickering lights. The fear returned, but I pushed through it, determined to end the nightmare. I started by lighting the sage and walking around the perimeter of the station, muttering a cleansing prayer I had found in one of the old books. The air grew colder, and I could feel the spirits stirring. I placed the candles in a circle around the pumps, lighting them one by one, creating a barrier of light. Inside, I sprinkled the holy water in the back room, chanting the words of the prayer. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe and twist, the air thickening with an oppressive force. As I finished the prayer, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I saw the ghostly figures of the victims, their eyes filled with sorrow. In the center stood Richard Holcomb, his expression one of agony and regret. "Release us," he whispered, his voice echoing with pain. I nodded, stepping forward to face him. "I will," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear, "but you must help me." Holcomb nodded, raising his hand to the symbols on the wall. Together, we recited the final incantation. The ground shook violently, and a blinding light filled the room. The spirits cried out, their forms dissolving into the light. The symbols burned brightly before fading away, leaving the walls clean and unmarked. When the light dimmed, the gas station was silent. I was alone, but the oppressive presence had lifted. The air felt lighter, and I knew the spirits had found peace. Exhausted, I stumbled outside, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The abandoned cars were gone, and the station looked like any ordinary gas station. I knew the curse had been lifted. I quit the job the next day, unable to face another night there. But I left with a sense of closure. The spirits were free, and the darkness had been dispelled. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the ghostly figure of Holcomb watching me. But there was nothing, just the open road ahead and the promise of a new beginning.